Hey everybody, in today's episode, we dig into elimination diets. Are they right for you? And are you even doing them right? Grass-fed, pasture-raised, wild-caught, what does it mean and how does it affect your food? And those influencers you're following, do they have your intentions in mind and at heart, or are they just trying to make a quick buck?
We'll also talk about a client story that involves Akkermansia bacteria and the gut microbiome. And of course, we're going to dive into the Make America Healthy Again movement, specifically the big changes that are happening to SNAP Ed. Well, hello.
Good morning. We'll clue people in. It is morning.
It is morning. We're giving you behind the curtain.
I have coffee.
I wish I had a third cup of coffee, but that's...
Oh yeah, you're an early coffee drinker, aren't you?
Oh, the moment I wake up.
You know me, I'm like the 2 hours, hydration, electrolytes, natural wake up.
When we were in Greece
afterwards.
And Manoli was sleeping in, because that's what you do when you're on vacation, and I was waking up at 8 a.m., I was yearning for coffee. So the first thing I did, the first day when I was going without it until like noon, I went and like learned exactly how to order my coffee in Greek. And that's like the only thing that's stuck.
Can you still say it? That's the ultimate test.
Dio freddo espresso schietto paracalo.
And you said?
That's what I said.
Yeah, what were you ordering?
Oh, double shot of freddo espresso is like espresso that's like whipped over ice.
Ooh.
Schietto means like no milk, just black.
Yeah, just give me all the caffeine. There we go. A little bit of Greek lessons and a dietitian coffee order to start your morning. Welcome to episode 2, everybody.
Welcome. I can't believe we're back.
Yeah,
we're
fantastic.
Doing it.
Yeah,
starting
really,
to feel like home.
It is. This space is fantastic. Once again, flowers to you for finding this and getting this all set up. And episode 1 was an absolute blast. So what do you got for us today?
A lot of feedback,
Yep.
So we're going to keep with the same structure. We're going to rearrange some of our topics a little bit. So just to kind of reiterate what we're going to cover, we're going to do a commonly asked question.
Perfect.
We're going to do an ingredient obsession, something that everyone's talking about, a social media react. We got some things. I can't wait. I can't wait to dive into that with you.
You told me that I'm going to be apparently reacting to something and I don't know what
Trying to hold it in.
I'm excited about it.
A client story. We're going to talk about what we want to be screaming from the rooftops, which I was doing screaming last time, so it's your turn. And lastly, we are going to cover what's the latest in Make America Healthy Again.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Without further ado, usher us in. Let's do this thing.
So commonly asked question again. Feel free, if you guys have questions, you can drop them in the comments on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're watching, definitely on Instagram. We love to hear it. This is something I get asked by clients all the time. Should I do an elimination diet?
Ooh, okay. Should I do an elimination? They are getting very popular.
Can I guess what you're going to say?
Please.
Are you going to say it depends?
Okay.
AKA our answer to everything?
I'm not needed here.
Sorry, continue.
An elimination diet definitely depends. One of the things I like to think about is, why are we eliminating?
Yeah.
That's first things first.
And what are we eliminating?
Yes, and
maybe next.
Once we know why, then we can say what might be worth eliminating. There's a tendency to just like blanket remove things, and that's largely people throwing something at the wall to see if it sticks.
You can find a lot of random lists on the internet of elimination diets for all sorts of reasons.
This helped me with a problem that you may not have.
But you should still try it.
But you should try it because it may help you.
And buy my detox tea.
Yeah.
Discount code in my bio.
Discount code in the link in bio. Oh, God. Elimination diets, though, I will say, they do have a lot of value, especially for people that are in insane amounts of pain and discomfort. And so they can be extremely helpful.
Sorry, what type of pain and discomfort?
That depends. It can be gastrointestinal pain and discomfort. It can be actual like full body inflammation, like autoimmune pain and discomfort.
Yep.
Those would be probably the 2 big ones that we would see on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. And in both of those instances, an elimination diet can be one of the few things a person has that they can do, right? They have to wait for the doctor. They have to wait for the medications. They have to wait for the testing, but they can do this experiment at home, right? And so I understand why it comes up and why it's such an opportunity. And also, in a lot of instances, food can be the culprit or it can be a contributor. Most of the time it's a contributor, which is to say it's not the main problem, but it could be exacerbating the problem, right?
Mhm.
It's to say that the inflammatory effects of certain foods are adding a small amount of inflammation to a highly inflamed system. But then it becomes in your pie chart of pain, what percent of the pain does the food take away? Is
Mhm.
it 10%? Because if so, we've probably got some upstream work to do. Is it 90%? Because if that's the case, then food may have really been the piece of the puzzle. And so our role as dietitians is really to hear those people out. And if you're going to do an elimination diet, I actually love to ask, should you do an elimination or should you do a reverse
Mm.
elimination?
Wait, let's back up then. Could
Yep.
you sort of define, for those who don't know, what is an elimination diet, so then we can kind of understand what would be a reverse elimination?
Fantastic. Yes. So, for example, an elimination diet would be take a client who has rheumatoid arthritis. And we do see evidence that gluten, dairy, and nightshade vegetables, all three of those areas of our food, have effects on the body and can exacerbate the rheumatoid arthritis. So they don't cause it, but they can definitely contribute to a flare up and increase the flare up.
And a lot of people find that removing one or multiple of those groups can result in a reduction in symptoms.
Correct. And with dairy, it's typically, again, it's the protein in dairy that causes this. The gluten is actually wheat protein. So it's the protein in wheat. And then the nightshades, it's not even technically the protein at that point. It's actually some of the compounds that are in nightshade vegetables, specifically your tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, those kind of things.
All very healthy foods, right? But
Yeah.
they may have compounds for these individuals that might exacerbate their symptoms. Yeah.
I had a client one time that said, he came in and he goes, "Hey, my one buddy, he doesn't eat tomatoes because it hurts his joints. And I wanted to ask you because I thought tomatoes were healthy." And I said, "Well, they are. They're super nutritious, rich in lycopene, great source of fiber, but they're not good for him." I said, "It sounds like he might have rheumatoid arthritis." He goes, "Oh, that's what it's called." And I said, "That specific disorder requires that specific elimination.
Right.
That doesn't mean the entire world should stop eating tomatoes."
Yeah.
And what I just said there, we've now done with gluten-free, with celiac or gluten intolerance and a variety of inflammatory conditions, noting that autoimmune disorders are wreaking havoc across our nation, and we don't have a great answer for it. We don't fully understand it. It's probably multifactorial. It's a lot of things going on, but an elimination diet, it's really easy to say, well, get rid of dairy and gluten. The only thing that's interesting is then you go, okay, well, when you get rid of those things, how does your diet change? Well,
Yeah.
you start eating a lot of plants, a lot of produce, and a lot of proteins. You start eating a very like Mediterranean, minimally processed diet. So is it the actual removal of the gluten specifically? Is it the actual removal of the dairy specifically? Or in this instance, in this hypothetical we're talking about, is it that you changed your diet so dramatically?
Yeah.
And that's where a reintroduction becomes important, because then you can have your new baseline of Mediterranean style eating as an example, and then you add back some Greek yogurt. Does it have an effect? So it's
Yeah.
to say that you start to notice, especially with elimination diets, the thing I'd want to highlight and we can dig into is elimination diets have to go both ways so that you can rule out and rule in. We need to make sure we don't just have placebo effect and we get rid of something and then we think that it's what fixed us. And then we also demonize that ingredient unnecessarily because we actually, without realizing it, made changes along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And elimination diets, the nature of them is that you are eliminating usually a pretty lengthy list of foods. Not always, but oftentimes that is what it entails. And so we need to consider the whole person and see, okay, maybe this would improve the rheumatoid arthritis or the IBS or whatever it is that they're dealing with. Of course, we need that reintroduction. That's going to be crucial. But even within the context of that, we need to look at the whole person. One thing I'm always considering as in training for becoming an eating disorder specialist is, how will this impact their relationship with food? We know people with GI disorders are also more predisposed to eating disorders. And so potentially something as extreme as an elimination diet might not be appropriate for them. Not even just in the realm of like relationship with food, but also when you're removing things, you have to consider what nutrients are now lacking from your diet.
Yeah.
And for how long can we actually sustain without those nutrients? Is there something we need to be supplementing in? Of course, that's where a dietitian can be super useful. And then I think the reintroduction is key, because if you want to do a true elimination diet, it is, a pretty rigorous process. You do need to be pretty exacting, right? So you do need to be paying close attention to trace, ingredients and things that might be present in just small amounts. And then when we reintroduce them, we want to do it in a very methodical way so that we can actually determine what is harming versus potentially helping. And then another thing I think of is even within the realm of cutting out something like dairy. Well, there's multiple things within just dairy itself that could be potentially causing an issue. And that's always something I try to parse out with the client. So you mentioned reintroducing something Greek, like Greek yogurt to start. Well, that's great because Greek yogurt, because it's naturally lactose free because of how the fermentation process breaks down the lactose.
Mm-hmm.
If there is something like a lactose intolerance that's contributing to an issue, we would know if they were able to successfully reintroduce Greek yogurt that it wasn't, let's say the casein or the whey in the dairy.
Exactly. And that becomes that piece of, is it that food? And then in that food, what is the issue? Because somebody may be able to go dairy free, but it's because of the casein protein, which means they can still have whey products.
Mm-hmm.
Or to your point, it could be a lactose issue, more of a lactose intolerance, in which case they could be dealing with some, they could still consume the protein aspects, which means some cheeses and some yogurts and things may be on the, still on the table. So it's important to recognize that. And then also it becomes the other piece, which is the next step of it, which is, when they were eating dairy, was it because they were living a fast-paced lifestyle and grabbing lunch on the go, and the thing they replaced it with was a meal with a fork where they actually sat down? So is their digestion better because of the removal of the dairy, or is it because the removal of dairy forced them to slow their life down to eat its replacement, and the dairy wasn't actually the villain,
Mm-hmm.
it was actually a victim of your poor time management?
Yeah.
And so this, you start to hear where it's really easy to use elimination diets to try and identify the villain of the equation. But if you don't really understand this world, you're going to sometimes blame the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up developing a negative relationship with that, a fear of that. And as you said, that can develop into eating disorders. And we are seeing ARFID, which, associated food restrictive intake disorder. It is an eating disorder when, said simply, when somebody has a traumatic or negative experience associated with a set of foods or a food, and then basically develops fear of it and anxiety over it and has all sorts of struggles with it. And if you're playing villain, find the villain, and you blame the wrong thing, you can develop an ARFID level association or trauma with a food that wasn't actually the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So we see, unfortunately, the casual elimination diet, just recommending, hey, just get rid of all this or get rid of these things. It's such a casual toss as a recommendation. It comes up in conversations everywhere. Like, have you tried getting rid of gluten? It changed my life. Have you tried
even
getting
in
rid
your
of
doctor's
dairy?
office?
Yeah.
I hear this advice being given to my clients
all the time. They have 5 minutes, and so they're always looking for the buzzwords. Get rid of gluten and dairy.
Mm-hmm.
See you in 6 months.
Yeah.
No direction, no follow through. And so I think this is one of those things where if you're going to go through an elimination, having a Sherpa, a guide that genuinely understands what you're removing, why you're removing it, what the downstream consequences of that are, what the potential benefits of that are, so that you can move forward in a way that is actually sure-footed, but also customized to you. Because we've just in a casual conversation, we've brought up like 5 different reasons for elimination.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like to make sure I do with patients, and we work with our team to do, is ask the question, is it time to do an elimination diet or a reverse elimination diet?
Tell us about the reverse elimination.
Yeah. So let's first acknowledge what the core elimination diet is. It is when someone is so miserable and they are so desperate for relief, and we are highly suspicious that it is food, but because we want to get them relief first before answers, we remove literally everything that we think could be the problem to get them relief. And then we assess their pie chart of pain in 2 weeks and say, hey, did removing this work? And it might be gluten and dairy and maybe the entire FODMAP. We'll use the FODMAP diet. So for those of you unfamiliar, the FODMAP diet came out in 2010 from Monash University in Australia. It was created by dietitians, and it identifies the carbohydrate types that our body struggles to digest, and it can create all sorts of gut inflammation and irritation. And so there's 6 types of FODMAPs. You can start by just getting rid of all 6. And then in 2 weeks, we would know if food was really a big piece of this. In 2 weeks, if there's no benefit, then this isn't the problem. We are legitimately barking up the wrong tree. If there's a mild improvement, it suggests that it's associated. It may not be the core problem, but we're getting close. If it's a massive improvement, then we know that we removed the issue. Now, Was it all 6 of them? And this is where, perfect example, doctors will now toss out, here's the FODMAP diet, go. And people think it's their diet for life. And the FODMAP elimination is meant to be a 6 to 8 week removal to assess the pie chart of pain, to see how much better you can feel, followed by a staggered and intentional reintroduction, ideally with a dietitian who's able to say, hey, we're most suspicious of these, so let's add these back first because we're less suspicious of these.
Mm-hmm.
And let's add it back and see, you're still feeling great. Boom, add these back. You're still feeling great. Add these back. Oh, you started to notice a mild version of some of that symptomology. Let's remove it. So we start to basically inch our way forward. So that's a traditional elimination diet. Usually takes 6 to 8 weeks. It's usually a 4-week wash period. And this is whether you're talking FODMAP or autoimmune protocol or any of the other diets that kind of fall in that realm. A 4 to 6 week wash followed by what can be a 6 to 8 week reintroduction phase where you're basically dipping your toes in the water strategically. That's the part that most people skip. And so they end up just eliminating foods and being afraid of things and blaming things that aren't even in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. You have to be organized to do this.
You do. And you have to be, there's a level of discipline in the beginning and like hyper focus that is required to do this, that I don't want to do that unless the person is like absolutely desperate for relief.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have a, what I'd call an undesirable but manageable level of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Or food is not thought to be the main problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a contributing factor.
Or even like specific foods aren't the problem, but maybe a bigger problem is they're going huge swaths of time without eating.
Yeah.
And then they're eating a larger volume of food that causes discomfort.
Exactly.
It's food timing. It's how quickly they're eating. It's, you know, how well are they chewing their food? It's, are they distracted and swallowing a lot of air while they're eating and drinking with a straw? It's all of these things that are also contributing. And we're not paying attention to those things because it is so in our nature to want to find the one root of all evil,
exactly,
and get that out, because that is so much simpler than actually looking at your eating pattern as opposed to the actual specific foods. Well said.
And so let's think about what you just said there. So you have a client that comes in and they are a level of misery that they are just desperate for answers. We may move forward with an absolutist elimination diet as long as they feel comfortable with it. And we will work together to see how quickly we can remove foods that we are highly suspicious of, to see if we can get any sign of relief after a short period, and then we'll walk that forward. But if you shift it over, you have a client that comes in and they are uncomfortable, but it's manageable, which means they have time to sort through this properly. Right? It's, in my mind, an elimination diet is kind of like you have a cluster of yarn that's all knotted up. An elimination diet is you just take the scissors to cut it, to get it to untangle. Yeah. Where if you have a knot and you're going to do a reverse elimination, you're actually taking the time to untangle it. And there's a time and a place to do one and do the other. So a reverse elimination is the observation that you have a client that comes in, they have uncomfortable symptoms, but it's manageable. And then we start to learn about what they're doing. And so that's when we're digging into what you just said. Their meal timing, their meal patterning. Is there, food recalls, symptom recalls? Are there symptoms associated with specific foods, or are they associated with environmental factors, how they're eating, when they're eating? They get symptoms because they're eating at 11 p.m. one night and it tends to be fast food. Like there can be things like that. And we'd want to rule those things out first before we start blaming ingredients and creating villains out of wheat protein. We should probably make sure it's not your current time management or processes or routine or rhythm. If we've ruled those out, we then may say, hey, this could be ingredient based. And there is testing we can do. We can do sensitivity testing. We can do other types of testing to see if we're suspicious to go downstream there. But at times it could also be worth, especially if you have symptom logs and food logs, picking the most likely ingredient. So instead of getting rid of all the FODMAPs, saying, hey, when we look through the FODMAPs, you consume lactose daily and it's multiple times a day. The other ones you don't consume with any daily regularity. So your symptomology pattern, which is a daily issue, not an erratic issue, would suggest that it's something that's occurring more often. Mm-hmm. So it's either perpetual because it's upstream of food and it's really not related to food, or if it is food, it's got to be something that you're eating consistently. So we're going to just remove dairy. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to see how much of your pie chart of pain improves. And then we'll see if we need to remove a next thing and a next thing. So a reverse elimination uses, whether it's AIP or whether it's FODMAP, it uses the same frameworking. Mm-hmm. The difference is it allows you to do one thing at a time, which feels less restrictive. It doesn't have this like super intense, almost like neurotic level of attention you have to pay. So it allows you to walk forward instead of jump forward. It's untangling the yarn. And I think that that can be a lot more in two ways. One, it's a lot more comfortable for people, but I think the other benefit is that it ends up being a little more declarative. It's easier to really see because they'll remove the one thing and go, oh my God,
You have
I feel
to
so much better.
approach it like a scientist, and that's really what we're doing. And I would say another approach that we just take in general as dietitians is we're thinking not just about what to remove, but we're just equally considering what would it be helpful to add in.
Perfectly said.
Something like a probiotic, specific types of fibers that might be helpful.
Yeah.
You may be doing a gut test and seeing what foods might help nudge them in the right direction in terms of their gut microbiome.
Yep.
So that's always something to think about too, because then I think our brains tend to go towards, well, I should be eliminating something. We're also going to be talking about what should we be adding in.
That's beautifully said. That's actually one of the things I was going to say about a reverse elimination. That's almost that next level, which is, let's go back to the FODMAP example. So we have a FODMAP diet. We have a patient that they're not, crippled over in front of the toilet every night, sleeping on the floor. They're uncomfortable. They're bloated. They feel gassy. They can't figure out why. And we have them do a food log, and through their symptom journal, we are suspicious that it's galactans, which is going to be a carbohydrate that's found in things like legumes and cruciferous vegetables, and to some degree in grains. So I could have them remove galactans from their diet. That is one of the options. Or I could give them Beano. Beano is the over-the-counter brand name for galactosidase enzyme. Galactosidase breaks down galactans. And for $7.99 for 300 pills, I don't have to take food from you. Instead, all I have to have you do is pop a teeny little pill 15 minutes before you eat galactans. And here's the funny part. What would happen if you started taking that pill and within a week, 90% of the discomfort goes away?
Yeah. I can't tell you how often I hear about this around Lent, because a lot of like Orthodox Christians will remove, dairy and meat from their diet for religious reasons during that time. And all of a sudden they're having a lot of bloating and gas. And what I'm hearing is, they're also incorporating a lot more beans and lentils. It's a lot more cruciferous vegetables that their body isn't used to metabolizing all of that at once.
Our body makes digestive enzymes based on how much we consume those things.
Yep.
That's why vegetarians, if they return to meat, they have to do it so slowly because their body stops making the proteases that break down protein. Like, vegetarians also have a better conversion of arachidonic acid to EPA than non-vegetarians because their body gets its omega-3s from non-meat sources.
ALA.
Our body upregulates and downregulates things based on what's around and what's available. And so, like you said, you start to see, a big dietary change. Is that actually that they don't have that enzyme, or is it that they just haven't had the time to make it? But in the meantime, if we know it's a temporary thing where they're going to eat this way for 2 weeks, we might just need to supplement that enzyme. And so I love that idea of, what if I didn't have to take away beans, which are great sources of fiber, and cruciferous veg like Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower? What if I didn't have to take those away? What if I could just give you a little pill that's super affordable and now you can continue living your life? And so I always, when we think about a reverse elimination, it's how are we stepwising forward in an intentional manner to rule things out? And then we get to have a combo. You come back in, you say, this fixed it. We go, great. So we have two options. We can either remove those things or we can supplement to account for those things. And to be honest, you don't have to have one or the other. It becomes, you are now empowered with the spectrum. Maybe these aren't the veggies that we keep in your everyday. Maybe we use green beans more often. Maybe we cook with zucchini more often. Maybe we prioritize other foods knowing that these throw you off a little bit. But then if and when you choose to eat them, it's never a no. It's a pop a Beano. And there are enzymes for virtually every FODMAP in this equation. And that's where people take broad spectrum enzymes, but sometimes a broad spectrum overpowers the gut because it's too many different types of enzymes. Sometimes you're better off surgically. And especially in this phase of elimination could also be used as a word identification. And so an elimination diet is the removal of to identify a culprit. What we're doing is we're not actually eliminating, we're just identifying. So we're using supplements to identify what could be the issue.
Yeah. Wow. So to recap, should I do an elimination diet? The answer is
what's going on with you?
Maybe. It
Why?
depends.
Why do you ask? Say more.
Oh my gosh. So next, we'll go into ingredient obsession.
Ooh.
Now, I don't know if this is like a specific ingredient per se, but it's more so a farming practice that's gaining a lot of attention. So this would be your grass-fed, wild-caught, sometimes said pasture-raised, this type of farming, these types of animal products that are farmed in this specific practice. So we're thinking, when I'm saying wild-caught, I'm thinking about things like wild-caught salmon. I get questions all the time, which is better, wild-caught or farm-raised? I'll also get questions about, like, is it really worth it to get grass-fed beef versus corn-fed beef? What does pasture-raised even mean? So let's dive into it. This is the latest obsession. So what do we think?
I love that. It's a lot of words, and there's a lot of things to unpack. What I want to make sure we talk about when we do this is we have sort of two, there's actually three areas, but there's two like levels of this that I'd want to make sure we talk about this, which is the level of farming and agriculture, and then the level of human nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes what gets blurred. And so when we, and then when I said those are the two, but then the third thing I want to be factoring in is the biases that exist in the debate. So when you have the organic farming model, wild-caught, grass-fed farms boasting and advertising their ingredients, their intention is that you prioritize buying their products. So they're going to leverage data and stats to their advantage. And the opposite is true. The non-grass-fed, the non-organic, the farm-raised, those sort of the opposites of what we're discussing, they're also going to try and downplay. And that's what can be so tricky, is you're going to see data that is favoring, quote unquote, both sides of an economic reality. And I'm not interested in the tribal nature of farming. I'm interested in the outcomes of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do my best to cut through the BS and the chatter that's kind of a distraction from this, and just lay out objectively what we see and what could have value, noting that the grass-fed companies are going to play up their benefits and the grain-fed companies are going to play down the potential benefits. Mm-hmm. And like most things, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. So we just went through a few different words, and they tend to get grouped together, but they do need to be discussed somewhat separately.
So let's start with maybe the grass-fed. What does that mean?
Yeah, grass-fed. So grass-fed typically refers to cow, so beef in particular, and so we'll focus on beef. Grass-fed beef, there's a farming and agricultural conversation, which is the two different types of farming models that exist, and that is a fascinating conversation that I can give a little nudge to, but don't want to make sure we don't spend today's episode talking about the traditional farming versus organic farming models, and then there is the trickle down to human consumption. So just to think about it this way, observing an animal's natural feeding tendencies. Cows eat the grass. And then you have pigs and chickens typically also live on farms, particularly in the United States. And that's where the pigs and chickens then eat the roots and then root through the feces to then get the other nutrients that remain. And so an organic farming model observes that the natural hierarchy of those animals is cow eats grass, and then pig eats root, and then chicken pecks through. And so you can have 5 segments on a farm where the cows are in one and they're eating the grass, and then basically you rotate them through the 5. So the cows go through, and by the time they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the grass has regrown. And then the pigs go through and they eat the roots, and by the time they go through, they're following the cows, and then the chickens go through. And what that ends up creating is a perpetual farming model that requires a lot less upkeep in some ways. Mm-hmm. You're also exposing these animals to a more active lifestyle, a more natural lifestyle. They're not as clustered, which means there may be less need for antibiotics and various other things. So from an organic farming model perspective, that would be the claim to fame there. Like, the reason to do it is for the quality of life of the animal.
There's an ethical
piece, and then there's also a potential like utilization of the land, where I'm going to misquote the actual percentage of this, but it's directionally accurate. It's somewhere around 70% of the America's farmland is currently used to grow crops to feed animals that they don't even eat. So like we grow corn and soybeans, like 70%-ish. Like I said, that's a directionally correct number. It's a large number of percent of our corn and soybeans is grown to feed cows who don't naturally eat corn and soybeans. And so we're wasting millions of acres of land to grow a crop that also like depletes the soil in a pretty noticeable way, that then is being fed to animals that don't necessarily even thrive on that. And then we're using the smaller space to confine the animals, which increases utilization of antibiotics. And there can be conversation about the demand of food is so high that then we start to use hormones to try and accelerate their growth, which you can hear is what has started as almost like an organizational efficiency on a farm, which had genuine intention and good merit and good value, at scale is starting to leak in some ways. So the organic farming model is the observation that, hey, if we did this organic farming model, if we could, here's the big if we could snap our fingers and every farm could be organic tomorrow, you would be able to make more cows, pigs, and chickens with less corn and soybeans, living off the natural land, and have a higher quality livelihood, have a better agricultural system. The problem is we can't snap our fingers and do that. You're going to have to replace corn fields and soybean fields with grass fields. Like we would basically crash our food economy. So the only way we can do this is you have farms that are naturally shifting, and we're starting to see the balance. And as we do that, we're continuing to study the merits. I don't feel the need to take a hard stance on anything I just said, but it is to note that a lot of the conversation around organic being better is not necessarily at the human level. It's very much at the agricultural level. And there are interesting studies that will suggest organic farming is more efficient and more optimal and has less downstream consequences and is more sustainable, but it also is harder to scale. And it's also asking to scale it while not completely destroying the food economy that currently props up our tables and our plates and our refrigerators. And so it's not as easy as just snap our fingers and fix it. And like anything, it's really easy to say the grass is greener and recognize that we're in our current food economy looking at its negatives, thinking, oh, well, if we were over here, it would just, all these things would go away. And it's like, yeah, but we're probably not factoring in second and third order consequences downstream of that one. And I don't claim to be educated enough in the downstream consequences of that model.
Yeah, we're by no means economists or agriculturalists.
Yeah,
we're just dietitians. So
exactly.
what we know is how these different types of, I guess, farming practices can impact the health of human beings. So
yeah, and so let's dig into that piece. So I wanted to make sure we touched on that because a lot of the pasture-raised, farm-raised, or grass-fed is an observation of quality of animal life and is also observation and advocacy towards a farming model that is thought to be better for a variety of reasons. And that's cool. And if you were going to ask me personally, we could have we could dig into that, but we'll shift. We won't fractal too hard down that stream. From there, you then have to ask the question, okay, well, what does that do to the animal? So what we do see is that when you have a grass-fed cow versus a grain-fed cow, just like in humans, they're leaner, first things first, right? If you have a human that eats a whole bunch of snack foods and refined carbohydrates and doesn't move because they're sitting on a couch just like a cow is in a stall, that cow has a ridiculous amount of calories coming in that it's not used to getting because it usually eats grass, which is not a very caloric food. And so it ends up having a higher fat composition. So when you cut that into steak, that steak is a fattier. It's a larger percentage of fat. So that's one thing.
Specifically saturated fat.
Yes, exactly. That's that next piece. So then we go, okay, it's a fattier cut of meat, which means it's a higher percent fat, aka lower percent protein. So now we have leaner cows versus fatter cows. Now, fatter cows make more meat by volume, but it's more meat by meat fat. They don't have more protein, they have more fat. And so you can say, oh, this cow, whatever, I'm just going to make up numbers. This cow gives us 80 pounds of meat. This cow gives us 100. I know the numbers are a lot bigger than that, but we're saying, oh, so these produce more. Well, that 20 pounds is almost exclusively fat mass. So that's one of the pieces. You go, okay, it ends up being naturally a leaner meat, which is kind of cool. But then let's zoom in further, which is to say, in the fat that exists, what do we see? And just like in humans, our fat tissue, our adipose tissue. Some of it is more metabolically active than others. Some is more ready to be utilized. Some has a more deleterious effect to our well-being.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true for other animals. And so you see that there is an increase in omega-3 fatty acids in grass-fed meat.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen things that kind of downplay this, but it's about a 30% increase, which is not nothing at scale.
That's a vastly different fatty acid profile than you would see in the typical fatty acid profile in a corn-fed cow, meaning it's potentially less deleterious to your health.
Yep. That's a great comment. And then from there we say, okay, so it has less fat, and then the fat it does have is a higher percentage of omega-3 and a lower percentage saturated because of the omega-3 and then some of the MUFAs and some of the others. But then take it a step further, the lauric acid and stearic acid and conjugated linoleic acid, which are 3 types of saturated fats that do break down easier in our body. Noting that saturated fat is a category, not a specific fat. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode. Saturated fats have their hydrogens saturating all their carbons, and so they are really strong. But not all saturated fats are the same, because our body likes to break fats in half to metabolize them. Well, there's a class of fats called medium chain triglycerides that are already broken in half. They don't have the same negative effects on LDL cholesterol. They don't have the same effects or like stresses on our body. And so when you look at the higher levels of CLA, stearic acid, and lauric acid, that means that the saturated fats are arguably a more tolerable or better type of saturated fat, and there's less of it in general, but then there's more of the ones that seem to be better for us or better tolerated by us is the phrase I'd rather say. So now we're sitting here going, okay, it's leaner meat, which means it's a higher protein concentration, which is really why we're eating it. It has more omega-3, which is always a desirable thing, and it has less of the saturated fats that are not great for us or harder for us to process, while having more of the ones that are easier for us to process. And when you look at the numbers, they seem very teeny, but when you actually zoom out and think of them at scale, it is inarguably a better quality meat. Now, you have to pay a premium for it. And what I despise about our society as we play this or that, is that me saying don't ever eat grain-fed meat? No, absolutely not. It has a better price point. It gives you energy. It gives you protein. It is still a great source of iron. It is still a valuable thing. But is grass-fed better in a lot of ways? Yes, absolutely it is. And it's from the farming perspective, arguably yes, down to the human perspective, arguably yes.
The way I explain it to clients is I want you to eat calories like one way. If it's a matter of you being able to afford food or not afford food, I would so much rather you get the corn-fed cow and meat. That said, if you have it in your budget to level up the quality of that food that you buy by any chance, I would say probably start with getting the pasture-raised, grass-fed, organic beef, eggs, chicken, because based on all the evidence of the organic food that we have available, I would say, and you can feel free to push back on this if you disagree.
This is gonna be a fun one,
I would say if we're looking at organic food as a whole, those 3 things, like your meat, eggs, fish, those are probably going to give you the most bang for your buck if we're going to be investing in organic foods at all. The produce, I would argue we have less evidence to support that buying organic versus conventionally raised produce has health benefits. Yeah. What do you think?
That's a great thing. And to your point, the organic produce is probably a combo for another day, because it's a downstream conversation of genetic modification, portion sizing, micronutrients by percentage, but micronutrients by percentage are kind of a fun math-based, illusion. So I'm going to steer us out. I'm going to focus more on the proteins, like you said. When it comes to meat, and this is again, one of the things I want to make sure I state very clearly. Observing that grass-fed meat has advantages does not discredit grain-fed meat from being a contender and a part of a healthy diet. Absolutely. And so to say one thing is not to say the other. And that's a lot of people here, because this is good, this must be bad. That is not what I am saying.
We're massively extrapolating.
Correct. If I'm going to give, and I hate using grading, but for this specific zoomed in thing, giving something an A and a B plus, the B plus isn't an F. It's not a game of A or F. And that's what most people try and do. They try and simplify this to the extreme. Beef is still very nourishing. And what I'd have somebody do, if grass-fed meat is not something they have access to, whether it's financially or just from a genuine accessibility standpoint, can we get a leaner ground beef?
1,000%.
Because going back to, let's talk about the actual bigger problem. The average American eats fast food like 8 times a week. And most fast food restaurants serve 75-25 ground beef, which has roughly, per 3-ounce portion, roughly 15 grams of protein and 38 grams of fat, versus a 90-10. So we go from 75-25 to 90-10, which has 23 grams of protein and 8 grams of fat.
Big difference.
So we just dropped 30 grams of fat off of which is a 270 calorie shift there, while increasing the protein by 50% in your protein source, right? That's the burger that you were going to put cheese and mayonnaise on and have French fries with. And so I would rather you eat leaner meat, and then
that is corn-fed
then not at all, noting that it's still aiming you towards what the grass-fed beef is doing, which is giving you a naturally leaner beef that of the fats that exist is slightly better. Mm-hmm. So we've got to realize that this is a spectrum. It's not a this or that scenario. And when one of the things you and I commonly criticize about a lot of the influencers out there and a lot of the bigger powers that be is they preach from a place of privilege that's so detached from reality, which is like, sure, if we're going to talk about like optimal food, sure, grass-fed beef is absolutely on that conversation. But most people aren't there. Most people aren't even eating enough vegetables. You get to a point where there's so many things that I'd rather them do that's going to create a big ROI than make them feel obligated to triple the price of their meat. That may not be in their reality. And I don't want them then to say, well, I can't get there, so why bother? Mm-hmm. It's like, that's, again, going back to, I can't get an A+ in this class, so I might as well get an F.
Mm-hmm. That all or nothing mentality is so easy to slip into.
Correct. And so that is my big warning as we talk through this, is these ingredient obsessions, there may be some merit to them, but taken too literally and taken to the extreme and in attempting to basically class them as this or that is a very dangerous game.
Absolutely.
I do agree with you. It was funny. The thing I was going to push back is you said chicken initially, but I know you meant fish. And then you said beef, eggs, fish. I agree with you on those 3. And we're going to dig into eggs and fish real quick. The reason when you said chicken, I laughed because that's a fun one I want to do last, because this is an example of the nuances of this conversation. So let's go through real quick. Now you have eggs. So you have a chicken that lays the eggs. That chicken is eating its natural diet, and it's also more mobile. We notice that the eggs it lays have literally triple the omega-3 content.
Yeah. And they have really rich colored yolks, and that's how you can tell the difference.
That bright orange color. And so, once again, does that mean that regular eggs that you're buying at the store that are still $1,000 are bad? No. They are still a great source of nutrients. Mm-hmm. They have choline and B12, and they do have some omega-3s, and they're a great source of protein. If they are a free-range egg that the chicken ate its normal diet and actually had access, and the omega-3 content is up, that is an improvement on that. And you can buy those for $1,200. It's, you pay more. There is validity to the value of that egg yolk, but it is not to the death of the core egg. The egg is still a wonderful thing no matter what. Once again, you start getting into the quality of life of the chicken, the model. There's a lot of influence of the farming model is better, so that's why you should do this. That was the original organic momentum, and then a lot of people just were not buying into that, so they started going into these micronutrient weeds, which there's some validity, but it is not to create a this or that, and I despise the this or that commentary. Fish, same conversation. If you have a fish that's out in the ocean, swimming, doing its thing, eating its natural diet, it is going to be a leaner fish. And then the fats that are in it are going to be a better quality fat that is better quality to the life of the fish, but then also better processed by our bodies, versus a fish that is farm raised, that they are tossing some sort of corn-based meal in. And so now we're feeding fish corn, which is like kind of funny when you think about it. And not all farm raised is that, but it is to say that a lot of the fish foods end up being a little bit of that base ingredient stuff. So you end up with a fattier fish that was not thriving, and as a result, it is inarguable that the fat composition is just objectively different. Does that mean you should never eat farm-raised fish? No, it's still a very nourishing thing. Once again, a B+ is still a good grade, and I'm not stating specifically that fish has a B plus, but it's just to give you a reference of getting out of that A or F. We need to recognize that just because we give something an A doesn't mean it's what's under it automatically fails. But let's talk about chicken.
What do you think about
Because we
chicken?
just spent a whole lot of time identifying that the difference across the three was the fatty acid profile.
Mm-hmm.
What about a chicken breast?
So chicken doesn't have that much fat, so maybe it's far less
Chicken
relevant.
breast has almost none.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference there is the antibiotics exposure, the hormones exposure. Let me ask you this. If a chicken is injected with HGH so that it grows faster and its muscle cells go through muscle cell hyperplasia to divide faster to make a bigger chicken breast, and you eat that chicken breast, do your HGH levels go up? No, not even close. That's not even, if anyone's pretending that's science, that is run from that person. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. A hormone that is stimulating the growth of cells does not get consumed by you.
Mm-hmm.
If that was the case, bodybuilders wouldn't need to inject HGH. They would just eat hormonally injected chicken breast.
They'd be saving them a lot of money and a lot of jabs.
So, do I like that chickens are fed all sorts of hormones and antibiotics and stuffed in boxes? No, personally, that's not my favorite thing. Do I recognize that we're 380 million people that love to eat and our Wing Wednesdays are in high demand? Yeah, so it's, it may be the devil we know right now. Mm-hmm. But it is to say that the example of this, where this ends up falling short, is if you're talking about a protein that is a lean protein, all of a sudden the difference is very, very minimal, if even present at all.
Yeah.
A chicken breast naturally has like a gram of fat to 26 grams of protein. If it's organic and it's free range versus it's just a chicken breast that was the traditional farming model, that chicken breast is a chicken breast. It is going to be bigger because of all the things we just talked about, but that protein, those amino acid sequences are the same amino acid sequences. So it is to say that the protein doesn't change across this farming model. The fats change across the model, and that is interesting and relevant and useful. Noting though that if you can be aware of the fats you're consuming, that may make this a negligible conversation. Yeah. And then the quality of the life of the animal is arguably different. And then from there, the potential sustainability of the farming model is up for discussion, I will say. Yeah. So that is the spectrum that is this whole world of pasture-raised, free range, blah, 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 blah. Now, I guess, is there anything else you want to go from there? I'll stop myself because you know me, I could talk all day.
I think we nailed it. Well done. All right.
So, I wish I could drop this mic.
But I feel like this really lends itself to our next topic, which is the social media react. So,
okay.
Something I've been thinking about recently is how do we help folks identify what is sketchy versus non-sketchy nutrition advice on the internet?
Fair.
Because I don't shame people for getting nutrition content on the internet. I think it's cool that they're interested in nutrition and it's showing up on their feed. And I love when it sparks conversations in our consults. Like, Devon, I saw this on TikTok. What do you think about this? I love answering those questions because I appreciate that you trust my advice on these things. But I feel like it might be helpful just to kind of give an overview. And I want your thoughts too on like, how do we identify some of this sketchy nutrition advice?
Okay.
So some things I thought about are they using a lot of buzzwords like toxic or miracle cure or superfood or detox, right? Like they sometimes are using these terms as if they're very technical terms and they're not. Yep. They're more like social terms that don't have a clear definition. And also it kind of paints itself into this like all or nothing holy grail or like terribly toxic A or F conversation. So that's always something I'm on the lookout for. If they give a lot of blanket advice, we're talking about just, everyone should be cutting out dairy and gluten. Now, there is some good generalizable advice, and there's always going to be
few and far between.
A few, like eat more vegetables, prioritize protein, be active, right? And there's always like a small group of people, or maybe that advice might not apply to them as much, but aside from that, there's not very much blanket advice other than that boring advice that you're used to hearing that I just mentioned.
Absolutely. The rest of it's a conversation and there's a lot of circumstances. Yep. And that is, it's the all or nothing for me. If somebody is taking like hard stances, I said this in our last season, actually, it was show me a person that has that resolute of just an unequivocal, like unashamed and just like dead set opinion, and I show you a closed-minded person, that means that they are not seeing the whole picture.
Yeah.
Like if there's someone that's taking a hard stance on something, that is likely a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
That is not likely a thorough understanding. And that's that Dunning-Kruger effect we've talked about over the years, where it's this idea of they know just enough to be dangerous. They've learned a little bit. Their perception of their knowledge dramatically exceeds their actual knowledge, and they take a hard stance. And I'll be fair. In college, I was that person. When I was working at GNC and studying nutrition, I mean, I was learning all the things.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was definitely taking hard stances on macro counting and the tools of the time that I knew.
We were both toxic at one point.
Of course. Now, were we creating TikTok channels and helping millions? No, not necessarily. I'm not helping millions.
Thank God there was no
millions.
TikTok back then.
I was going to say Devon the dietitian might have been a mess back then. But it is to say, though, that every person on the path to mastery, there is a phase where you start to learn and you start to gain understanding and you get excited about that understanding, and then you have overconfidence about that understanding.
And you want to share it with people.
Which comes oftentimes from a very genuine place. I'm not going to blame every influencer and say they're saying anything they can say to pay their bills. Many of them are probably genuinely think they're doing and saying the right thing, but then 3 to 5 years later, they are preaching a very different tune, because when you enter the phase of arrogance, you will accidentally hurt people, many times yourself, and that will it will force you to humble up and become more robust in your understanding. And then you step back and you create a much more nuanced. And so when we joke about it depends energy, it depends invites a conversation, and a conversation acknowledges the complexities that are food, in environment, in biology, in genetic, in social aspects, and psychological. Like, it's meant to embrace the tug of war that comes from many different directions. It's a multifactorial tug of war. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, if someone has that hard stance energy, they're either trying to get clicks, or they have limited knowledge that is heavily biased based on an experience, or both.
And a lot of times they're like I'll see people citing scientific articles, and you can cite an scientific article all day long, but we may be reading the same information, but if you're trained in reading scientific literature and interpreting it and applying it based on the body of evidence, not based solely on one study, you're going to approach that information very differently. Your applications and conclusions are going to be very different. And so same goes for, on the internet. If you see people citing one study, it doesn't necessarily definitively mean that they're evidence-based. They may be reading that scientific article, but they're coming to the wrong conclusions or drawing the wrong applications from it. I'll give you an example. If you knew that omega-6 is a pro-inflammatory fatty acid, you may automatically assume all foods that contain omega-6s, like walnuts, are bad for you.
Yeah, are highly inflammatory.
And so you would be correct in the root knowledge that omega-6s are present in a lot of these foods, and they are pro-inflammatory, but the application, the conclusion is very different than what someone who's actually trained in nutrition, like dietitians, would come to.
Well, here's a fun question. So you're on a run and you pull your hamstring. Do you want your body to do nothing about that? Because pro-inflammatory means driving nutrients and water to an area, upregulating growth factors and peptides to heal things. Like, you cut your arm open. Do you just want to have a gash forever? Because if so, then great. Avoid all things pro-inflammatory. But you start to realize there's some arrogant assumptions that miss the effing point, which is, yes, we live in a society that has high levels of inflammation, but that doesn't mean that pro-inflammatory things are bad. Pro-inflammatory processes in the body are the natural tug of war with anti-inflammatory processes that allow us to maintain homeostasis. You can't have one without the other. If we were all anti-inflammation all the time, you would actually delay your recovery. That's why there's studies that when you take ibuprofen after a run, it impairs your muscle return. Right? You don't get stronger from that workout. And you'll hear people that'll say, you wasted the workout. It's not that dramatic, but it is to say that it suppresses recovery, because inflammation in certain circumstances isn't just a good thing. It's necessary.
Yeah, that's why you get a fever when you get sick.
Yes.
It's a natural inflammatory response.
You start to hear the complexity here where we go like, do I want people eating more anti-inflammatory foods, assuming that they're not eating enough of them? Yes. Do we want to be balancing these processes? Do we want to make sure our leukotrienes and prostaglandins and icosanoids, which are the things in our anti and pro-inflammatory pathways that actually produce these downstream effects, do I want to make sure that all of those are in function, not just the anti and not just the pro? Yes. Do a lot of people have a disproportionate pro to anti right now? Yes. But you can hear where it's like, this isn't just a this or that conversation.
We've lost the plot here.
Yeah, people get really lost, and that is they know just enough to be dangerous. These antioxidants are good for these things, and pro-inflammatory is bad. It's like, well, not necessarily. And so you want to make sure someone has it depends energy and is willing to just drive the conversation and not necessarily give you like a nerd out lecture like I tend to do, but at least understand what I just said. Like if your influencer doesn't know what an icosanoid is, probably shouldn't be talking about anti-inflammatory processes. Just saying, it might be a little relevant to that systematic
approach.
Name
one prostaglandin.
Yeah. Anyway, I digress.
Anyways, but yeah, so those are just like some things I always caution people to look for. If they're using a lot of buzzwords, if they give a lot of blanket advice, if they don't disclose conflicts of interest, I'm not saying if they, they're supporting a supplement or if they have a supplement line, they're automatically non-credible. But if they're not at least disclosing that conflict of interest, that's red flag automatically. If a lot of their content is centered around fear-mongering, I'm always very skeptical of that because I'm just curious to know, like, what is the intention?
This is crashing your testosterone levels.
My guess is they're either trying to sell something or they're genuinely scared themselves because they don't fully understand what it is that they're talking about. And they want to share that information with other people because they're scared themselves and they don't want other people to suffer. I think there are genuine intentions, but again, we've lost the plot.
Well said. No, I agree. The hard stances, the exclamatory, the fear-mongering, those are all things that they feed into people who, again, we are fear-driven. And so when we hear something might be dangerous, it's very attractive. And so at bare minimum, there's definitely a benefit to fear-mongering content, which is that more people will see it and watch it and listen to it. But the downside is that it is creating fear in things that may not need that fear. And so we're stoking unnecessary fires, and that can be extremely toxic and negative. And man, so many of our clients, our role is to help talk them off the ledge of all of the fear-mongering that's out there. And it comes from better understanding what's actually taking place. So I think you said it perfectly. Those are definitely the pieces of the puzzle that stand out to me. Those hard stances, the fear-mongering language, the die on the hill of an ingredient kind of conversation. Anything that, like, if it seems that way, it's likely not fully true.
Speaking of fear-mongering and all or nothing mentalities.
Your smirk is telling me something's coming.
I wanted to give an example of something I would be a little skeptical of. And that is the Bobby approved movement. Sorry, I don't mean to pick on any individuals, but I think this is a really good example of what we're talking about.
I've never heard of this. Is this like, are we talking RFK?
You don't know about Bobby approved?
Is this like RFK with Make America? Okay,
no,
this is not that Bobby.
Different Bobby.
Different Bobby. I have not heard of this Bobby. Talk to me about this Bobby.
Bobby Parrish. He is one of those wellness influencers on the internet who is trying to help people eat healthier, but is unfortunately a little bit misguided.
Okay.
And so he created an app called Bobby Approved, but his platform...
That's a bit narcissistic.
I'm going to create an app called Devon Approved.
Devon Approved. I was going to say dietitian approved. That sounds like a label that makes sense. Bobby Approved sounds like he's trying to be the king of his castle. Okay, so Emperor Bobby. Talk to me about Emperor Bobby.
So again, he goes around grocery stores, he picks on certain foods, and he says whether or not they are Bobby approved and why. So I thought I would love to read to you, what does it take to be Bobby approved, and what are the 10 commandments of Bobby approved ingredients? And just hear what
10 commandments of Bobby approved ingredients. So that is like, that's Moses. I mean, this is biblical. Like
this is getting biblical.
Man, he's got a chip on his shoulder. Okay.
Okay. So what does it take to be Bobby approved? This is from his website. BelieveCity.com/Bobby approved.
It's not BobbyApproved.com.
Products you can trust that are made with clean and best-in-class ingredients. If it's Bobby approved, you don't even need to read the ingredients.
Okay, so I've done all the work for you. Don't think, follow me, be my sheep. Okay.
Less than 10% of products found at most grocery stores qualify for the Bobby approved stamp of approval. That's pretty exclusive.
Yeah, it's a VIP club. You should be thankful that you can be a member of this club.
All right, so now I'm going to read you the 10 commandments.
Please.
We'll see how many foods we think are left in the grocery store after we
Please tell me
read
this
these.
doesn't read as thou shalt. If it's
1, thou shalt.
no,
Just kidding.
Oh God. Oh man.
1, free of seed oils.
Okay.
2, free of refined or artificial sugars. So actual sugars or artificial sugars. Free of harmful preservatives.
What's harmful? Yeah.
Not sure which ones those are.
Interesting line.
Free of GMOs. That stands for genetically modified organisms.
Oh yeah. Wow. That's a spectrum. Okay.
Free of artificial or natural flavors. Free of harmful pesticide and chemicals. Free of artificial food colorings. Free of ultra-processed ingredients. Not sure what that is. Free of harmful toxins. Free of harmful fragrances.
So organic meats, organic fruits, and organic vegetables.
I guess that's it.
And I mean, that is like 10% of the grocery store.
We can buy his cookbook.
Oh, really? That'd be great. We can tag him.
Anyways, not to pick on him specifically. There's lots of examples like this, but
Yep.
What we're trying to get at is it's not that simple as yes or no, good or bad, approved or unapproved.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I'll say this, my grandmother, who passed away right before Thanksgiving, was 98 years old. And I took her to dinner on her 98th birthday for a glass of wine and some spinach artichoke dip at The Pub, which was her favorite restaurant that she went to every Friday with her girlfriends until about 2 weeks before she died. So this was a woman that didn't make it to 98. She thrived through 98. She lived a lifespan 20 years longer than the average in America. She swam and exercised well into her 90s. She did not eat the Bobby approved list. So my question would be, so what is that list going to get me?
Yeah.
Am I going to be
anxiety?
immortal?
That's what.
Yeah. Am I going to be immortal? Like, I mean, that's what becomes so hard is you start to realize where this fear is of the unknown and the uncertain, and it takes on a life of its own and it morphs into something that's beyond rationale and understanding. A lot of these influencers, it starts with a good intention. Hey, my name's Bobby. I'm super passionate about food, and I want to make sure that you're fueling your body in a really optimal way. And then you just get lost in the freaking desert, Moses, 40 years style. That's where this dude's at, like middle of the desert with his app taking selfies. Like, what are we talking about at this point? I am all for supporting people in their health, but that is a mental, physical, emotional reality. And there's got to be some conversation. While I'm all for prioritizing quality food, when is this going to end? And that reminds me of the Paul Saladino thing, right? It's I'm going to go carnivore. And then 5 years later, after making millions on his book about carnivore, admits that he stopped going carnivore because it destroyed his body. And you go like, and you're still making money off of that? But he started with a genuine passion that healed him in certain ways. And he read some short-term studies and then extrapolated them in a way that was honestly arrogant. And it came back to bite him. But the thing if I was ever going to sit down with that dude, the thing I'd ask him is, so like, what's this going to do? Am I going to live to 150? Am I never going to have a problem ever again? Like, to that level of neuroticism, what is my payout?
Yeah.
Like,
I'll just note that
oh my gosh,
in these 10 commandments, every single one through 10, starts with the words free of. So it has nothing to do with what is actually in them. It's we're focused on what is not in them, which I think is really missing the point.
Huge subtraction by addition people, which is let's remove things by prioritizing good things. And so let's talk more about what we should be eating and less about what we shouldn't be eating. And that's going to continue to echo across our podcast is when people like to take things away, we like to put things in. That's why we like to test galactan inefficiencies with galactosidase. Mm-hmm. Let's put in an enzyme instead of take out a broccoli. Mm-hmm. Anytime you can add something to dilute, it's no different than why the difference between people when they quit smoking. Mm-hmm. If they just quit smoking by taking away cigarettes, they have taken away the thing that supported them and reduced their anxiety and gave them an outlet and a break. Mm-hmm. But they didn't add anything back that was supportive. Mm-hmm. If you add in positive habits and then use those habits to replace smoking, that person's going to be smoke-free a lot longer. Mm-hmm. That is true for food and emotional eating. That is true for so many things. And so while his list of things, do I want to see a lot of those things reduced? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And would that reduction come from helping people better understand how to prepare and plan and prep quality proteins with quality produce? Absolutely.
Hmm.
But that's not what we're talking about. That person just narrowed down someone's grocery list and left them completely overwhelmed. And I don't doubt he has a whole bunch of content that's integratable, but it is to say that, man, if you're going to thou shalt not, maybe you should also have a segment on thou shall. Yeah, this is a fun one. And I think we can kind of, tie it in with what I know we were going to talk about after that. We've been doing those Vitract tests, the gut tests, with the company Vitract. We're one of the main practitioners in the region, but also in the country that's using this testing to help people with gut health. And one of the things that's so fascinating is it is a very affordable test that basically lets you see the entire snapshot of your gut microbiome, the diversity of the species. And through that, we're able to focus on what we can add back in. So like what species are missing. And what I have noticed across, 50 tests at this point, just in recent recall, is the percentage of clients that are lacking or have literally zero Akkermansia, which is right now a buzzwordy thing, right? For any of you that have heard about the GLP-1 probiotic, the Nature's Ozempic Pendulum brand is like, they're out there advertising hard to the tune of $99.99 and $74.99 and price points that are out of this world. But Akkermansia is a specific strain of bacteria that is in our gut at baseline. It is the one that when they were doing those fecal transplant studies about 10 years ago and they had to cancel them because someone transferred feces, got a parasite and died. So, but it's to say one of the things that those studies did reveal was that when you took a lean person's feces, transplanted into the gut of a non-lean person, that person started getting leaner. And one of it was because of the restoration of Akkermansia, which is in higher levels in lean people and lower levels in obese people. We have some cool circulating theories that Akkermansia is more antibiotic sensitive. So when you go on antibiotics, it can just like wipe it clean. And so now that we're a couple generations into antibiotic obsession and we just toss them at everything, we could be basically like killing the Akkermansia in a lot of humans.
Not to say that antibiotics are bad. We love antibiotics.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great catch. This is not an antibiotics rant.
Risk management over here.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to walk that line and be clear in what we're actually saying. And so if that was the perception, that's not what I'm saying. There's a difference between saying they are prescribed very, very casually and maybe excessively versus they are not useful. They are one of like the pillars of modern medicine that are the reason we live to 80, not 60. So like world changing. But they also can have some downstream second and third order consequences. One of the ones we're seeing is that Akkermansia gets obliterated. Akkermansia is a gut strain that once it's dead, it does not repopulate without supplementation. It is not in any other probiotics other than Akkermansia specific probiotics. And it is important for metabolism, for butyrate, which is basically butyrate metabolism, which is like fat breakdown. And it is like necessary for inflammation. So long story short, I have one client in particular that we've worked together for a long time, healthy lifestyle, activity, eating patterns, basically losing weight as a side effect of very, very good lifestyle interventions, but has been plateaued for quite some time. Starts taking the Akkermansia after a Vitract test. Their Akkermansia was at 0. And a month in comes back and goes, I've never had a relationship with food like this. I was like, what do you mean? I get full. And I actually like get hungry, but it's like an appropriate hunger. Like I've just been like eating so much more calmly. I'm not like obsessing and thinking about food all the time. I'm not constantly ravenous. I'm not insatiable. I just feel better. And steps on the scale down the most they've lost ever in our time together while not feeling restricted. Part of it was an inflammatory flush of the body just exhaling, and part of it was a genuine fat loss, and it was the largest fat loss they had.
That's amazing.
And it was a month on Akkermansia, and now we're about 4 months in, and it's just continued to create a metabolic reality for this person. What I want to state, that does not mean I think everyone should go out there and take Akkermansia, but it is really fascinating when you see an example of someone who had done all the good things to maximize their reality. When we pull this gut score, it was really good except for lack of that. We then take took that last puzzle piece. Let me emphasize, it wasn't the whole puzzle. It was one piece of a puzzle, but it was a piece of a puzzle that then unlocked a baseline for her that did not exist in her entire adult life.
That's incredible. And that's just
It's
like
so
a testament
neat.
to the power of the gut-brain axis and the microbiome, because we know that our bodies work synergistically with a lot of these gut bacteria, and a lot of our hunger and satiety hormones are actually produced in the gut, and are like Akkermansia is a crucial part of those as well.
Exactly. And also, I hope you can hear where this person and I worked together for a long time. We prioritized good things. We got great results. There was a lot of good life things happening, and this was just another puzzle piece.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't the quick fix that everyone should start with. This is a piece that may or may not be beneficial. If everyone started doing that supplement, a large chunk of people would see some sort of notable benefit. Many would not.
Yeah,
and it's
because that's not the problem.
That's not necessarily their problem. And also, if the people that do see a benefit, if that's the only thing they do, it's going to be a much smaller benefit.
Mm-hmm.
This was a piece. This was that little, the minor thing that only got activated and amplified because the major things were good.
Yeah, it would never be a first step for us, right? It's looking at all the other higher order priorities
all the
first.
Other pieces.
That is so cool. And again, I think it's great to be able to work with someone long-term like that, where you do get to start to get more granular in terms of what can make improvements.
Yep, exactly. That pie chart of pain becomes a pie chart of progress, and it just builds momentum and it compounds like all good things do. Amazing. So that's a shout out to Vitract for amazing testing that we've been using more and more at our team, just because so many people have gut issues. And this is the first gut test that's affordable, actionable, and actually like does its thing. And we're not sponsored by them. I just said that in a way that felt very like sponsored by, and we are not, though we do love them. Shout out to them.
Yeah.
And then also
go back and watch that episode.
Of science, which is say I'm 11 years into private practice. I've helped thousands and thousands of humans. And this is a new way I'm helping people that I did not personally have as a tool in my toolbox 5 and 10 years ago. So like we're always learning, but we're adding it to a mental map as practitioners that is a very robust mental map.
Yeah.
And that is a case for why we exist is, hey, we're out here learning it, we're iterating it, we're trying to be on the cutting edge, but we're also trying to make sure we're doing good, not harm. And we're trying to walk that tightrope as an asset. So that's just kind of a fun story.
That story.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes. I don't want to make you late.
Yep.
Do you want to do Scream from the Rooftops, or do you want to do Make America Healthy Again?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. You're giving me two. Why don't we treat what we just did as our Scream from the Rooftops? Because the gut testing and the continuous learning and the working through things together, all of that would be something that I would love to scream from the rooftops. And so why don't we let that Akkermansia combo, the scream from the rooftops isn't go buy Akkermansia, and it's not go take a Vitract test necessarily, but it's to say, hey, there's some really awesome things happening, and it might be beneficial for you to have a Sherpa that helps you troubleshoot from a place of insight. So let's scream that today. And what's going on with Make America Healthy Again? There's all sorts of talk. And again, our promise is that we want to bring it up and then talk to it, especially from a perspective as a dietitian. So we're focusing not on the Make America Healthy Again movement as an overarching. We're focused mostly on the nutrition. So update me.
Let's do it. So just to clarify, for those who don't know, Make America Healthy Again is a political movement. It is spearheaded by Robert F. Kennedy, who is currently our director for the Health and Human Services division. So a lot going on in the world of changing our health and wellness, regulations, recommendations across the country. So the biggest one that I think is worth talking about right now is what's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, specifically Subtitle A of that act, which is about nutrition. So this was just passed in the House not too long ago. It was passed by, I think, 1 or 2 votes. It was very close. And so now it is going over to the Senate for approval. And so there is a lot to this bill. I tried to read through as much of the actual bill as I possibly could, and it's very long. Specifically, even the nutrition section, there's almost too much to go through. So I'm going to highlight 2 of the, I think, most relevant changes that are proposed in this bill that would apply to us and that maybe we could throw our 2 cents in on.
Okay.
So again, there's so much to this bill, but one of the biggest changes that a lot of people are talking about are the reforms to SNAP. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is one of the biggest anti-poverty programs in the U.S., specifically dedicated to food insecurity. we care about that. We're dietitians. We want people to be eating and eating well. So again, two of the main significant reforms that I want to highlight is one, the redefinition of eligible foods in SNAP. And so the bill will amend the definition of food that's allowed under SNAP eligibility. So there are already some exclusions on this list. So you cannot use SNAP benefits to purchase tobacco products or alcohol or foods that are hot at point of sale. So think like the hot foods bar. You can't buy live animals, and you can't buy non-food items like cleaning products at the grocery store. They are proposing adding some exclusions to this list. The biggest one that people are talking about is soda, but also things like candy, ice cream, prepared desserts. They will have 180 days after this bill is passed, the USDA, to determine which foods make that list based on their nutritive value and how closely they align with the dietary guidelines for Americans and those that do not. So it's going to be a huge undertaking for the USDA. Good luck to them, but that is one of the big proposed changes. And then the second is state cost sharing. And so, again, this is one that I feel like is really hot in the media too because of all the potential downstream effects of this. But states will be asked to take on 5% of the SNAP benefit costs and 75% of the administrative costs. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, this will be a cost savings of $267 billion over 10 years. So those are the two big updates.
Two big
so
ones.
State cost sharing. States sharing more of the cost of SNAP, and then also a redefinition of those eligible foods.
Yeah. So, last time for our Maha, one of the things I invited people to do was to get clear on their stance, why they feel that way and where it's coming from, and then be productively vocal.
Yeah.
Now is the time. Now is the time to be productively vocal. These are proposals, and proposals are negotiations, and negotiations come from conversations that are based in surrounding the issue, highlighting potential positives and then also potential consequences, and trying to maximize the good and minimize the bad. And so you and I talked about the idea of, I have what I think is a brilliant idea that helps 50% of people. You have an opposing view that helps 50% of people. How can we work together to help 80% and then make sure the 20% are not screwed? The state-based funding thing is a very good example of earlier when I talked about the farming models. It would be super cool if we could just snap our fingers and organic farms could be our entire farming model, and we'd have all the animals living freely on the farm, and we would take back 70% of our farmland and away from corn and soybeans and reinvest it into grass and trees and all of that. Millions of people would die if we did that.
Yeah.
That's the harsh truth. It can only be done as a baton pass.
Yeah.
One farm at a time, becoming organic.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely, the percent organic farming increasing over the course of probably decades. We're already 20 years into that movement. There was a Netflix documentary way back before Netflix was even on a computer that was about farming. And that was, so this movement's been a long time coming. I would say the same thing about this state-sponsored conversation. There is a time for sledgehammers and there's a time for scalpels. We are very nearing the time for scalpels. Yeah. And if this
especially when it comes to food insecurity.
Correct. If we just go in, the discussion may be busting things up to drive conversation, but if they don't get surgical, this is going to hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
Cutting these things without, it's funny, subtracting without addition. So quitting smoking without adding positive health habits. That's, if you have people that are reliant on these things, kicking them off of it without alternative is objectively a bad idea. We have to figure out a way to land this plane that minimizes the damage done. And so when you talk about reallocating budgets, and I understand, reducing spending, especially with debt, and we're not going to go down the political rabbit holes that are this conversation, or we'll be here for hours and still not be any farther. But it's to say that if we're going to reallocate funding and then we are going to prioritize certain funding, we have to look at, okay, what are we cutting? What is that currently doing? And the people that are in those trenches and know what it's currently doing need to be very productively vocal and try and bring that to the conversation so that we can make sure we're helping as many people as possible and hurting as few people as possible. I would love to see funding going towards prioritizing quality foods. So going back to, are we taking away sugary foods or are we improving the access to fruits and vegetables and cooking lessons and education on foods and access to quality and nutritive foods. So it's like, are we removing the thing that people are reliant on and then leaving them to not have alternatives? Or are we improving access to the things that we'd rather? So that's that subtraction by addition again.
Yeah,
are we just
absolutely.
subtracting or are we adding? And if we're going to cut a budget, we need to be very, very careful. So this is the time to be productively vocal.
Yeah.
I think that this is proposed, right? A proposed bill drives conversations about ways money is going to flow.
Yep.
And so the people that live in these areas, that are knowledgeable of these areas, that have experience in these areas, let's have conversations, recognizing that the reality is this is a conversation, whether you want to have it or not.
Yep.
So you can either not come to the negotiation table and like pretend like that's going to do good, or you can accept that we're currently in a place where this is happening. Some version of this is going to happen. It's a game of tug of war that I wish we could do more amicably and create an outcome that was really genuine. Unfortunately, the tug of war gets very competitive and, very tribal, but the game of tug of war is happening. And so now is a time to check your biases, check your understanding, check your awareness, and let's have really productive conversations because this is something that could go well, but also could go very wrong. And people that are afraid, it's because of the uncertainty where we don't really know the good and how we're trending that way, but we are pretty aware of what could go wrong.
Yeah.
And so that only gets better if we lay it all out, map it out, and then create a path forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a people.
And us as dietitians, we are going to be the boots on the ground people who are going to be dealing with the ramifications of this and how it actually impacts people. So we'll keep being vocal about what we've been seeing and how it's been impacting people. But
our experience in WIC, I was going to say,
I'll say that I personally was a beneficiary of SNAP and WIC. Lots of my immediate family and close family were all and have been all SNAP beneficiaries and WIC beneficiaries. And so, I don't know. So I have that unique perspective, which makes me biased in some ways, but I think also offers a unique perspective, especially now that I am a dietitian and we still work with low income individuals and see how this impacts people. So I have some thoughts.
I was going to say, do you want to share them?
Yeah.
Let's dig in.
So let me talk first about the redefining of what counts as food under SNAP eligibility. So my approach to this would be the same way I would approach an individual. I would not be telling them food's good, bad. I would say, obviously, tobacco, alcohol, there's not a lot of nutritive value there. So that's an easy, we're going to try to keep that as little to zero as possible. So I think that makes sense that it's not covered as a SNAP benefit, right? But things that do offer nutritive value, even if it's mainly just calories, I think that there is still some merit to that. And I think about, again, trying to avoid this all or nothing good or bad scenario. Maybe what we could do instead, this would be my proposed amendment to this bill. If I was
let's hear you out.
In the Senate right now trying to get this bill passed, I would say that maybe instead of restricting a bunch of these foods like candy and soda, et cetera, potentially we could instead create a structure in which maybe that SNAP dollar goes further if we're using it on produce or whole grains.
So incentivize quality foods.
Exactly. And I think we have a really good example of this here in Pittsburgh, Gateway Engineering, who you did an interview with their CEO. He actually did this in his workplace where he offered food subsidies for the more nutritious foods and then just didn't offer a subsidy. Didn't offer a discount for those less nutritious foods. So again, that would be how I would approach it, is maybe still allowing people to purchase whatever, foods they wanted with SNAP eligibility, even if it wasn't the most nutritionally dense, but nudging them in the direction and, allowing for there to be somewhat of a reward for their SNAP dollar to go further if they are choosing more nutritious foods. So that's my proposed solution to this. And I think that emphasizes more of an additive focus rather than a restrictive one. So we're emphasizing the things that we could be adding in. But I think about my pregnant mom or my cancer patient who is really struggling with nausea and tasty cakes are the one thing that they can tolerate right now. I don't want them to no longer have access to that because of SNAP eligibility changes. I also think about my parent with a child who has special needs, who really only likes, their Cheez-It crackers, and that's their, it's not ideal, but maybe right now that is their main source of nutrition, and that's what they can get them to do. And with my clients, I kind of establish levels to things. We have level 1, which is you need calories and fluids, right? So that's my clients who are food insecure, my clients who are maybe pregnant or struggling with nausea or cancer, things like that. So I always just emphasize to them, I want you fed and hydrated. And then if we can expand on that, if we can level up from there, let's talk about balancing our meals. So having protein, carbs, fats, and produce at our meals as often as possible. And then level 3 would be let's choose higher quality sources of those things. So that's how I would approach this from a public health standpoint as well. Is like, let's maybe nudge people more in the direction as opposed to saying these foods are not allowed. I think that just provides even more stigma and more red tape, people being able to access food when they're already struggling.
I appreciate that perspective.
What do you think?
One of the things that comes to mind is policy is rarely as nimble as we need it to be.
Yep.
And this is an example of they're drawing a line somewhere.
Yeah.
And what you've said and what I've heard is, hey, maybe we don't draw the line as harshly and maybe we create a spectrum.
Yep.
We create a gray area.
And if we're already having to go through the entire list of foods, and it's realistic, it's not the legislators doing that, it's the USDA doing that, and they have a whole team. Is it that much more complicated to add this layer of complexity? We're already adding a lot of other layers of complexity elsewhere.
So I would agree. The question that I would nudge back on, because I think that I agree with a lot of what you said, and there's some subtle differences in my vision of it. I totally agree that we should be incentivizing quality foods by saying, hey, your SNAP funding goes further with certain things. So we're going to give you more of these things for less, and then but these are still on the table kind of scenario. One, when I hear that, there better be dietitians in this conversation.
1000%.
And they better be dietitians that have been career community dietitians that understand the community, that understand the people that actually use the benefit, so that we can really, because it goes back to, it becomes this really simple idea of, oh, the food bank has a bunch of fruits and vegetables. And it's like, great, but they don't know how to cook the vegetables, and you're assuming they have a kitchen. Yeah. And so there's again, Dunning-Kruger, there is an ignorance to the people that tend to make the policies, that they're affecting change in people that they don't even understand. And so I think that first thing I'd say is we better make sure the people that are in this conversation have robust understanding of the communities that are being affected. Where I would push back is in creating this spectrum. I still think there's a place that you draw the line and say it's not funded, because the assumption assumption that and I'll say this is an assumption that recently changed. My thinking about this recently changed. So I'm going to challenge you on this a little bit. Are we saying they can't have candy? So like right now we don't let them buy alcohol and tobacco. Are we saying that no one on SNAP education smokes and drinks?
No, we're not
They're
saying that.
using their own money for discretionary, disposable, personal preferences. So if we're saying that their SNAP education is to their nutritional benefit, at what point is there an opportunity to draw a line and say, you can eat candy, go nuts with your Snickers bar, but government and taxpayer dollars are not going to fund your Snickers. And I'll comment, then this is a fun conversation to have, because these are the conversations that need to take place. You and I don't even need to walk away today with a hard and fast policy, but these are examples of things that we need to be thinking about. Is we have the origin of SNAP education was rooted in food insecurity and inadequate nutrition and nutritional deficiencies. In 2025, most nutritional deficiencies are not caloric.
It's micronutrient.
They're micronutrient, right? Most people's the percent of people that have caloric inefficiency versus people that have caloric abundance is orders of magnitude different. If we look at the lowest income populations that are relying on SNAP, do they have lower rates of obesity and higher rates of osteoporosis and osteopenia? No. So we're saying that they're not struggling necessarily with calories. And so when we sit there and say we're taking calories from them, the people that are on board for that would argue that that's kind of the point, is we need to be drawing a line and saying, hey, if you want to enjoy these foods, great, go nuts. But that is not the point of this nutrition program. It used to be in the past, when calories were not adequate, the goal was to get people enough calories. But now the goal is to get people the right calories. And if that's done appropriately, that could arguably be an evolution of a good thing becoming a great thing. I would love to see SNAP Ed, which had genuine origins from day one to try and get people enough nourishment, to us saying, hey, we're a world leader in medicine and in health, and we're at a place where we don't have a calorie problem, we have a quality problem. So let's now make SNAP a higher quality thing. Now, this comes back to what you just said. If we're going to do what I just said, that doesn't come from just saying candy is now smoking. That is potentially a part of this conversation, but it would also come from empowering quality through improving, if you're buying protein and produce, you are getting 5x or it is 50% off, right? So I agree with you wholeheartedly that there would be more value in us properly incentivizing
Mhm.
the good stuff to encourage and improve access to it if our initiative is genuinely to feed people and feed them well.
Mhm.
Step one was feed people. Well, we're now in a reality where we feed people, but we don't feed them well.
Mhm.
So now, if I would love to see tax dollars go towards feeding people well, and I agree with you that the better priority would be what are we empowering them to eat instead of disempowering.
Mhm.
But I do not agree that we shouldn't also draw a line. I just don't think that should be the number one part of the policy. I do think that we could treat certain foods like alcohol and tobacco, not to demonize them and make people afraid of them, but just to objectively say that is not in your nutritional interest. That is a food you're eating for fun. If I eat a Snickers, it's not because I need nutrition. It's because I'm enjoying a treat. So like, use your own hard-earned money to get a treat, and then let's use this money to nourish you.
Mhm.
And I think there is some intention in that, but how you say that, how you land that, and how you execute that is massively important, because if you're not careful, if all you do is draw a line in the sand and ban certain things, and you've done nothing to empower people to get access, you haven't actually done what I'm talking about, which is level up nutrition access to quality nutrition access. To take us to the next level, you have to do the additions like you're talking about.
1000%. I think that leads us well into that next point, which I would sort of like to, I think should be our last point because we got to get going.
We got to wrap up. All good.
Is the state changes. So again, this is my pushback on some of these state changes of the state cost sharing. So again, just to reiterate, SNAP is going to, they're proposing that SNAP, 5% of the actual benefits be the responsibility of the state, and then 75% of the administrative costs. What are one of the biggest administrative costs to SNAP is SNAP Ed. So SNAP Education. So this is the nutrition education branch of this supplemental nutrition program. And if we are going to be empowering people, I think education is a huge part of that. That's why we are here. That's why we have this podcast. That's why we became dietitians in a large way. And I think a lot of the big criticism is especially these underfunded states that are now going to be responsible for shouldering the cost of 75% of the administrative costs are going to inevitably have slashes to SNAP Ed. And that's why a lot of dietitians have since mobilized and gotten very vocal about the importance of SNAP Ed. Partly because I would say a lot of dietitians are employed by SNAP Ed.
Yep, there's a bias there.
I
for
even
sure.
did an internship
There's
with
also
SNAP Ed
genuine need
and genuine
it's both.
concern.
It's allowed to be both.
Yep. And so that would be like my other thought is like if the intention is to make America healthier, why are we, potentially jeopardizing these educational programs that are designed to not just feed people well, but ideally also educate them on how to do so.
Yeah.
And I understand that they're not saying, we're going to totally get rid of this. They're just saying the states are going to be responsible for it. But again, if we're thinking about the downstream consequences, my question is like, what is the true intention of some type of reform like this? And just to kind of go back to my stat before, that was from the Congressional Budget Office. There's going to be a $267 billion saving over 10 years. I actually watched an interview with the Secretary of the USDA, the Secretary of Agriculture from the USDA, Brooke Rollins. And the first thing she mentioned was how costly SNAP is. And it totally is. But maybe we just call it what it is a cost savings rather than an effort to make Americans healthier. Yeah. I have no doubt that some of these do have genuine intentions of making people healthier. But again, these state, cost sharing, I think that is mainly a goal to reduce government spending, which to be fair is what, Republican politicians tend to do is decreasing government spending. But again, let's call it what it is. Let's not call it making an effort to make Americans healthier. That's my pushback.
Okay. And what I'd like to do is what we can hear is how this trickles up, which is to say that we are currently in a Republican-based period of time. And I don't want to make our discussion about the upstream politics, though it's inevitable that it's a part of the conversation. What I'd love to do is zoom out, then zoom in, which is to say that is the current reality that, like you said, upstream, the current priorities are to consolidate, right? You have a party that believes smaller government allows the private sector to take over, and you have a party that believes that bigger government allows for more consistency and raises the floor for all. And our podcast is not about that debate. And I mean, that's a fascinating debate, and but it's not really the scope of this. So what I want to then do is say, okay, we are currently in a reality where smaller government is the initiative. And so right out of the gates, a lot of people are going to be, this is a non-starter. They disagree because they disagree with the precedent that smaller government's the answer.
Yeah, which we're not having that conversation.
We're not having that conversation either, right? See how I'm zooming in, right? We're not having the conversation of which side is right, or then from there, like, no, that's not where this is going. But we zoom in and we go, okay, we're in a place where in the next few years, we are going to realize smaller budgets. That means that an idealized to-do list of 100 great endeavors, right? Because the government funds great things. We are now saying that all of those endeavors have to take a 30% haircut, just as an example, just a number. So do all of them take a 30% haircut, or do we get rid of 30% of them, or do we get rid of 15% and then contract the rest to 15%? How does the budget happen? Being vocal is what allows you to compete for the resources that are at your disposal.
Absolutely.
And so that, if we're going to zoom in, if SNAP Ed is really that valuable and that important, then we need to prove that and show that and show the outcomes. Because one of the bigger problems when we, I shouldn't say bigger problems, one of the bigger conversation points has been a lot of these departments have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and their outcomes have gotten worse and worse and worse. So there's an objective question, which is, are they actually working? And when we talk about the administrative size, if a certain percentage of the money being spent is administrative and the bigger administration has created lower outcomes, the question is, why do we have that administration? If I hired 30 people and started losing $100,000 a year, I didn't utilize those people well. So you can either go in and try and help those people realize their benefit and then create a positive trajectory, or you fire those people. Once again, that is a higher level political decision that is kind of out of the scope of what we're talking about. But if we're going to accept the reality that we are in budget cut season, as an entrepreneur I can speak to, and as a dietitian I can speak to, we need to be looking at, with the budget we have, what is the best use of the money available? And there are obvious benefits to SNAP. There are immense benefits, most of it being the actual delivery of real dollars to people so they can buy food. So if we can become more administratively efficient, and we can then use more of the money to prioritize budgets, and then those budgets can go towards the right foods, noting that right now our current scenario doesn't reduce diabetes and doesn't extend lifespan. It's not doing the things we want it to do. So something needs to change. Yeah. Right?
I would agree with that.
And my comment would be, dietitians that are far better educated and professionals that are far better educated on this segment and industry than I'm speaking as an entrepreneur and a dietitian in a very different realm and reality, should be putting together creative budget proposals of, hey, we could become more efficient here, which would allow us to leverage more dollars towards the actual people to better support the people, which means the money is going in the hands of the people. And then what can we be doing to educate those people? And what can we be doing to get them and empower their access? Going back to your idea of, hey, let's disproportionately incentivize them to buy certain foods that are agreed upon across a panel of experts, as an example. And so I think that's where I'd be honing in is, like you said, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so the best way to deal with that, in my opinion, is to build plans to try and nudge the uncertainty towards a better outcome. And so squeaky wheels need to be squeaking was a viral clip from last episode. And I would say out loud again, this is where the people that are very knowledgeable of this should be taking that knowledge and helping us better understand the legitimate value of SNAP, not just from it's the right thing to do.
And it's a nice idea.
Yes, because it is, unequivocally.
Yeah, and it is so much more than that.
So is everything else that's going to get cut,
that.
Right? If you're going to cut 30% of good things, that means 30% of good things go away. And I'm not here to have the conversation about whether or not we should be cutting it. I'm here to say it's happening. So what can we do to make sure these things are prioritized? And then also, can we look in the mirror and say, hey, over the last 30 years, has the expansion of this, what has it actually done? And is there a way to do it more efficiently? And is there a way to do it more like for better outcomes? And I'm not the person, my gut instinct would say there's definitely a way to do it more efficiently. There's definitely a way to do it more effectively. And there's probably a better way to do it for less money. I'm not the person to build that proposal, but I would assume that there are very, very well-educated people that have spent their careers in this space that have seen the inefficiencies of their reality and have seen the effectiveness of their reality and can speak to the more of this, less of this. Let's build a budget. Let's do more with less. Let's get creative and let's put ourselves out there and vie, because we don't want to be one of the 30 that get that get axed. And so this is a chance for all those great initiatives to put themselves out there, be great, and then also hopefully drive even better outcomes, especially if the current outcomes aren't, there's some good things coming, but they're not as great as they could be. And that, like I said, none of that comes from necessarily an agreement with the political hierarchy. It's very much dealing with our current reality. And as an entrepreneur who's had to deal with the ebbs and flows of business and hiring and pandemics and all sorts of things, like, pivoting to create better outcomes is an inevitability. And right now, while things are shifting, you can either be a victim or you can be a hero in this. And for those of you that are very knowledgeable and the right voices for this, please, please, please be bringing those assets to the table. We need you now more than ever.
Absolutely. Great.
Fun.
Good little debate. And yeah.
It's fun little pushback. I love conversations like this. I love the dialogue. I hope that it gets people thinking. The whole point is to collect perspectives, use your round table to come to great conclusions, and hopefully drive forward better outcomes from a place of insight, not from a place of personal bias.
Yeah. It's hard to root out that personal bias.
Oh yeah, none of us are perfect at it, but we do it better together if we let ourselves. So
totally.
Thank you for a great episode. This was a fun one. I hope all of you enjoyed, and as per usual, keep vocal with us, keep messaging us, sending your ideas. I've loved hearing from all of you. That's been a great thing. And we're going to keep these coming monthly, and keep an eye out for more content here in the weeks ahead.
Subscribe, comment, visit us at casespecificnutrition.com if you want to get matched with a dietitian, and we will see you next time.
Be well, everybody.